people that you really loved and you really got on with, maybe a product manager that you really loved, or some people that you hated, you didn't really get along with, maybe an engineering leader, maybe a product manager again. And so think back to that time. And then at that time, maybe you had some role models as design leaders. So maybe you looked up to people and you were like, that's someone I aspire to be. Or maybe you looked up to your first design leader and you were like, I never want to be like that person. Maybe. But think back to that time, just a few more seconds. Back then, in your first design job, what did you think design leadership was all about? So just spend a few seconds in silence. And you can open your eyes now. Thank you. I appreciate you all closing your eyes for 90 seconds. And I did the same exercise. So I looked back and I was like, 15 years ago, what did I think design leadership was? And I thought it'd be quite fun to share some little persona cards or archetypes of what I thought design leadership was. And so the first one, is this what design leadership is? Don Draper, the creative director. So he flies into exotic locations, wines and dines clients, presents the team's work with unerring confidence, and then closes the deal and takes it back to the office. Is that what design leadership is? Or maybe design leadership is the lone genius. Steve Jobs, rumored to be like this. People would come in and present to Steve, and in 30 seconds, he'd make a decision, a design decision. Brilliant ideas, makes decisions on a whim. Maybe that's what you thought design leadership was. Or, the last one, maybe you thought it was like Steve Carell from The Office, the process manager, the manager that just wanted to stamp their human-centered design process on the team and make sure that no matter what, the team followed that process. Maybe that's what you thought design leadership was. And so, having thought about that, those personas are kind of fun. I thought it was kind of fun when I look back. But to me, today, design leadership is none of them. There are people out there like that. There definitely are. But I think that it's much more than that today. It goes way beyond design. It's quite a personal thing. And it's hard. I think design leadership is hard. And I've come, over the last 15 years, to a few different revelations myself of what I think design leadership is. And I'm going to share them. There's 3 of them. And the first thing that I think design leadership is painful. And so, as I mentioned, I'm going to share quite an open, vulnerable story about myself right now that not many people know. And this story starts prior to Atlassian. So my job just before I started Atlassian. So this is about 9 years ago. And I was a consultant, or an agency, depends which way you want to frame it. And the important thing to know about this job is that when I had this job offer to start there, I also had another job offer. I had 2 offers. One was working for a friend as a head of design at a large consumer publisher, cushy job, big salary, big team, large products to kind of work on. Or the other one was this job, being, again, a head of design, but head of design of no one, really. There was a team of 1. Working as a consultant in a small consultancy, about 15, 20 people. And the job was to build a design practice. That was the job. And I purposefully chose this job. Less money, less status. I purposely chose this job. The reason being is that I wanted to learn about what it was like to be a consultant. I'd never been a consultant before. I've never been on the outside. I'd always been in-house. And they were also doing quite interesting work, so in-flight entertainment for Qantas, streaming video and media back in kind of 2012 when Netflix was really becoming popular. And so I chose this job very deliberately. And I took the job, and then I turned up on day 1, and I was happy. True story, I didn't actually have a chair on day 1. That's actually a true story. There's 15 people in the office, and they didn't have a chair for me. But I was happy. Things were good for the first 12 to 18 months. I was building a team. I built a design team. I was defining a human-centered design process that we would go out and pitch to large clients. I was talking to very senior people at these large clients, big companies. And we were winning really interesting work. As I mentioned, we were doing in-flight entertainment for Qantas, streaming media on tablet and mobile, gaming consoles. It was cool technology, and it was super fun. It was exactly what I had signed up for. It was awesome. And then some projects started to go bad. Some of these big clients became more demanding. I was on very stressful video calls. Well, actually, back then, they were just telephone calls between Malaysia, Singapore, Sydney, America. Big calls, 30 people, projects going bad. I started to work late pretty much every day. I started to work weekends. And it was incredibly stressful and intense. And at this time, I had this personal realization. And that personal realization was that the work I was doing wasn't particularly meaningful for me. What I was doing was helping more people watch more TV on a different device. And so I had this personal revelation, job was getting stressful, and then the team that I'd built started to fall apart. I hired someone, probably wasn't a great fit for them or for us. I didn't really deal with it. I was a bit of a bad manager. And then 2 of my superstars on my team quit. They were like, we can't deal with that person, we're out. And then I had to go and deal with that person, and so my team pretty much halved overnight. So I then went back and had to start using design tools and doing project work, because I didn't have enough people to do work. And so I'd been a bit of a shit manager. I didn't really know how to deal with this very complex situation that I was in. Big projects, stressful clients. Couldn't really cope. And then on top of that, I started not being able to sleep. I wasn't very present at home with my wife, Zoe. I was working late, pretty much every night. I physically lost weight, so I actually lost quite a lot of weight, and I stopped socializing with my friends. But at that same time, with all these bad things that were going on, I was doing more and more work, working later, working weekends, doing project work, because I had to. But I was thriving on that adrenaline at the time. And so the biggest barrier to solving all of these things was myself. It's easy to solve problems when you're looking at someone else. It's actually harder to look in the mirror and admit that I'm perpetuating the things that are making me physically and mentally ill. And I was burning out pretty hard. That was really what was happening. But at this pretty low time, I hated my job. It was impacting my sleep, my health, my relationships. I was incredibly angry. I was an angry, angry man. And the reason I was angry was because I'd chosen this job deliberately. This was my dream job at a cool agency, doing cool, interesting work, building a team, building a design practice. And yet here I was at one of my lowest points in my life and in my career. And I really didn't know what to do, quite honestly. There's this great quote by a man called Charlie Engle. You should look him up. Former drug addict, former alcohol addict, now ultra-marathon runner, super inspiring man. But he says, what happens to us isn't as important as what we choose to do about it. And I think that captures myself at the time, because I could have hidden, and I could have said, it's the job, it's not me, it's all the other things that are around me. But I didn't. I chose not to. I chose to look in the mirror and focus on me as the core problem. And I was actually very lucky as well at the time that my wife, Zoe, she said to me, I remember one night at home, she said, you're not particularly much fun to be around anymore. I don't think you're very well. I think you should go and see someone. And she was right. She was right. And so I went to see a psychologist or a counselor, and he told me I had depression. I was depressed. That was why I was losing weight. That was why I couldn't sleep. There were a bunch of the problems that I had. But with his help, and with the support of my partner Zoe and my friends, I turned that situation around. Instead of being that angry man and thinking, why has this all gone wrong, I started to see the positives. I'd actually learned a lot as a consultant. I'd learned an incredible amount. We'd done a lot of good work. And so that pain that I was experiencing, but that reflection, meant growth for me, meant learning and progression. And so step by step, I started to rebuild myself and my career. And I started to network in the local Sydney design community. I started thinking, well, what's important to me in a job? And I realized that it wasn't the type of work, cool technology, in-flight entertainment. It was the values of the company that I worked for. And it was the people that I was working with and the values that they had. That was what was important. And so from one of my lowest moments, I managed to drag myself up, and that's how I ended up at Atlassian. And so the first piece of real talk about that situation is that I firmly believe that it can be painful, design leadership. But everything important happens in the hardest times. When everything's going really well, you don't really learn that much about yourself. It's when the shit hits the fan that you learn about yourself and you find out the things that are inside you and the things that are important to you. So however hard times seem, know that they are learning moments. And so the real talk is that pain plus that reflection equals learning. So recognize those moments as key learning moments in your career. So the second realization, or it may not be a realization, is that design leadership is being a fucking leader. And it may sound obvious, but it wasn't for me for a large chunk of my career. And this is me, believe it or not. This is the earliest photo that I have of me practicing design. You can tell it's a long time ago. I have a shirt on, and my hair is modeled after Noel Gallagher from Oasis. So I love this photo. But this photo was taken at a time. I was early 2000s, 2002, I think. I was a design team of one. So I did everything: brand, interaction design, visual design. I built my own laboratory, user testing laboratory, using Moray software. Anyone remember Moray? Yeah, classic. I was doing a lot of A/B testing. The websites that I worked on were in 30 countries, so I was learning to design in German and Portuguese and English, and that broke all of my designs, and that was hard. But I was learning. I was learning a lot. It was great. And then one day at this same company, I became a design manager. Success. I had a small team, I had some contractors, we had an agency that were doing some ethnographic, longitudinal ethnographic studies for us. It was great. But as a design manager, I was terribly unhappy. Terribly unhappy. And do you know why? Do you want to know why? Because my job title was design manager, and it wasn't design director. That's why I was unhappy. How shallow was I? It was very shallow. But this was my goal. This was my career goal: become a design director. This is what I wanted. But the big problem in the career and in life is you're just trying to acquire the next thing, or hierarchy, or status. So with that specific goal, I was never going to be happy. And I've had all the titles now: manager, lead, director, head of design. It sounds fancy, it's not really. And I was never actually happy, though, throughout my career, 15 years, until about 4 years ago. That's when I first became happy. And what happened 4 years ago was that I was fortunate enough to start working with an executive coach. And my first meeting with the executive coach, I was very excited. It's like, right, I'm going to meet with this executive coach, prepare. And I went in, and the first meeting, the first question he asked me, which I should have been able to nail, but I couldn't, he said, "So Alastair, in 10 years' time, what do you want to have achieved in your career?" And I kind of stunned silence. And then he said, okay, we'll try a different one. He said, "Imagine you've retired. What do you want the people that have worked for you and with you to remember you for?" I had absolutely no fucking idea how to answer either of these questions. Absolutely none. It was an incredibly sobering moment for me. And again, there's this lovely quote from James Victor, super lovely man. He says, "We've gotten so used to looking around that we've stopped looking inside." And I really think that this captures the problems that I had at the time, because I was looking at shiny job titles and should I work in cool technology like in-flight entertainment? And I was spending absolutely zero time looking inside me to the things that made me tick and the things that I wanted to achieve in my life and in my career. And so, spoiler alert, when I do retire, I don't want people I've worked with to say, he was a great design director. That's really not what I want people to say. I'm hoping I've had a more meaningful impact. And so I worked with this coach, continued to work with him, even though he made me feel very embarrassed. I continued to work with him, and the first thing we did was we created vision statements for me. One for me personally and one for me professionally. And I'll share those with you now. So my personal one is to be an inspiring father and husband. And so we started with me because you need to look inside yourself and you need to start with you. Work shouldn't define you. You've got to start with yourself. And then we moved on to professional. And my professional vision statement is to exponentially grow people, products, and teams that I work with. And this was a really good first step. This was great. But my coach, and myself at this time though, now had to ask an even harder question. He said, so Alastair, what are you doing to exponentially grow the people and teams that you work with? Now, I'd always prided myself on being this great leader, but then I started thinking, and I was like, am I really creating the space and the right environment for my teams to thrive and to grow? And so we started analyzing the things that I was doing. Again, this is kind of hard to think about what you were doing, but these are the things that I was doing. So the first thing, I was being reactive to situations. Unexpected stuff would happen, and I would manage it. Awesome. But I let things happen to me and my team. Stuff just happened. I like talking, but I spent a lot of time talking. Opining, sharing my ideas in meetings, not giving space to my team. I like this one. I was focused on outputs. Are my team busy? Have we hit this quarter's goal? That was it. That meant success. I mentioned process at the start, but maybe from my consultancy days, I was like, right, does the team have a structured user-centric design process? Are they following that? I hope so. I spent a lot of time on what I call low-leverage activities. Activities that kept me busy, checking things off a list. But those activities had very minimal impact or influence on people that I worked with. And I had this narrow focus. I was focused on the design team and the design output. I thought I was being a good partner for product and engineering and marketing, but I didn't know really how the business worked. Like, I was very focused on design. And so we came to the conclusion, after analyzing these activities, that I was being an excellent manager. And so we started thinking, well, what does it actually mean to be a leader that people want to follow? And so the first thing I started doing was being proactive. I started leading, not managing. I started creating opportunities for myself and my team. You're judged as a leader by your ability to drive to outcomes, and that's what I started to do, lead to outcomes. I spent a ton of time listening. There's a great quote by Dan Pink. He says, argue like you're right, listen like you're wrong. And I spent a lot of time listening as if I was wrong all of the time. I was the last person to speak in meetings. And when I did speak in meetings, it was more usually to say, that's a great point. Can you help me understand that a little bit better? Creating the space for my team. I spent a lot more time focused on inputs and giving my team meaning. Do they understand why they're doing what they're doing? The team has meaning, and they also have the right inputs, and they are asking the right questions, they're much more likely going to be set up for success. Stephen mentioned frameworks. Instead of process, I started thinking about guardrails and frameworks. Successful teams want autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So I gave teams frameworks and guardrails to work with and around, and then with the right inputs, they had the luxury to own their own destiny and be successful in where they were going. This one needs a little bit of explaining. I spent more time on what I call high-leverage activities. If you want to grow people and teams, you need to focus on activities that will influence people the most. And so a tactical example, I think we lost me. Oh, we're back. A tactical example, every week I spend 2 to 4 hours writing down what's top of mind for me. I then share that with the 70 or 80 people in my design org. They then share that with their product and engineering partners. The reason I spend 2 to 4 hours doing that is that it has a wide reach. My team of 70, 80 people start understanding how I think, the things that are important to me, and I'm starting to share meaning and understanding across a broad spectrum of people. Another example of a high-leverage activity is spending more time in one-on-ones, coaching and mentoring people and giving them frameworks and guardrails to work within to grow themselves and the people that they work with. And I've started becoming what I call more of a holistic leader. I broadened past design. I started to understand, what does strategy mean? What is a successful, winning, sustainable strategy in your competitive landscape? I started caring more about what problems my product and engineering and marketing partners had. And so I broadened past design, and by doing that, I became a much more effective partner for the people I worked with. And so to wrap up this piece of Real Talk, it's kind of in two. Find your why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Don't follow a job title or hierarchy or status as I did for a number of years. It will definitely disappoint you in the long run, I guarantee. And then once you do lead, don't manage. You want to be a leader that your teams want to follow, not someone that just manages them day to day. So, the last section. So the third kind of realization that I've had is that design leadership is lonely. And I do believe this, and I think the larger your team gets, might sound ironic or counterintuitive, the lonelier it becomes. The more people you have, the actual lonelier it gets. And I'm going to start this section on loneliness talking about feedback. Now, I like to think I create like a trusting environment with my teams. They give me in-the-moment feedback. Every 3 months, I proactively ask them for feedback, and they send me feedback. And I'm going to share with you some of the feedback that my team have given me over the last 6 to 12 months. You can see what they're going to think of me. You ready? You ready? Okay, so the first piece of feedback, please stop sending Slack messages in our one-on-ones. Now, I was like, that's not me. I don't do that. And then I'm like, guilty. And it's kind of funny, but also it's not. It's disrespectful. I am not valuing my team's time. This is their one-on-one time that I need to spend with them, and I'm not valuing that. So it's disrespectful. The next piece of feedback. You often repeat yourself, and it can be quite annoying. Again, it's funny, right? It is funny, but I'm wasting my team's time. I'm not being a clear communicator. And that's something I pride myself on, being a clear communicator. Now, the next piece needs a little bit of context. I use this framework. It's a great framework. You should look it up. HBR 6 Styles of Leadership. It's a situational leadership framework, and what it means is in different situations as a leader, you should adopt a different leadership style. You shouldn't have the same style in every situation. 6 styles: coercive, visionary, coaching, democratic, pace-setting, empathetic. Without going into what they all mean, pace-setting is a type of leadership that you almost never want to display. It can be relevant, but it's the style that you want to use the most. And so the next piece of feedback, you can probably guess where this is going. Be mindful of crossing over from visionary to pace-setting leadership. Oops. Now, again, I was like, that's not true. I don't believe it. But then I know the person that gave me this feedback, and I dug into it. And what was happening was that at the end of a project, instead of acknowledging the team's work and saying, this is awesome, well done, I was just saying, great, what's next? What's the next customer problem we're going to solve? And so I was, instead of coming across as visionary, I was coming across as pace-setting for that simple act of not saying thank you and not acknowledging the work. So the next one. We felt disempowered when you changed our design decision. Now, this has happened a handful of times in my whole career where I've changed a decision that my team has made. I don't often do this. You don't want to take the pencil out of people's hands, but this was a big design decision that the team had made. I disagreed with it. We dug into the qualitative and quantitative feedback together. We went on that journey together. And ultimately, I felt accountable for this very large customer-facing design decision. And based on the data I had, I thought the team had made the wrong decision. So I changed that decision. But the team told me that they felt disempowered, and I don't blame them. But then the next piece of feedback says, it showed great leadership when you changed that design decision. And so even though they felt disempowered, they recognized the magnitude of the change, and they were pleased that someone had basically said, we believe this is the wrong decision. So, welcome to my world of feedback. But I can tell you that every quarter, every 3 months when I read this feedback, it feels very fucking lonely. It really does. But as your teams get bigger, you'll get more and more critical feedback. And you need it. But it is lonely when you get that feedback. I felt very lonely and vulnerable when I was sitting there reading those pieces of feedback and saying, is that really me? I certainly wasn't jumping up and down with joy. But then I'm reminded of this quote. I actually don't know where this quote came from, but it says, which do you want, the pain of staying where you are or the pain of growth? And so despite the pain of loneliness that I felt, it's helped me. It shows my team that I'm listening to them and I'm changing my behaviors based on what they're telling me. I'm becoming a better leader based on this feedback. Now, at exactly the same moment that I was reading all of these pieces of feedback and feeling incredibly lonely, these are some true life situations that my team were also dealing with. Okay? So the first thing that one member of my team was dealing with was depression. I've got a direct report who works for me in Sydney. I'm in the USA, so I'm 9,000 miles away from him. And I found out that he hadn't been at work for 48 hours. And we couldn't find him. And then we went, called some people. We did find him. But we found out, because we didn't know this before, that he was suffering from depression. And he'd had a depressive episode, and hence he hadn't come to work for 48 hours. And so we got him some support through our employee assistance program, and he's now doing much better. Still at Atlassian, doing really well, but he's learning to deal with depression. Now this one's hard. So in March of this year, Emma passed away from cancer after 3 years. So she'd been battling cancer for 3 years, and she'd worked at Atlassian for 3.5. And myself and Liam were part of the hiring team that hired Emma. Liam managed Emma, and I managed Liam. And so throughout that time, Liam was helping Emma and her family through this incredibly difficult time for them, and for Liam. Slightly happier, but another one of my direct reports, his wife gave birth to twins, but they came early, and they were in an intensive care unit for multiple weeks. The other fun fact is that he already has a 3-year-old, so he's now learning to deal with 3 kids under the age of 3 in his house. And another one of my team members was diagnosed with a very serious health issue, and he had to take very immediate and progressive treatment to fix this over a 6-month period. Now, I Googled this for a bit of fun, how to be a good design manager. There is a book, no comment on the book. But I can tell you that there is no instruction manual for how to deal with all of this. There's none. And in the one-on-ones that I had with my team every week, I was helping them deal with these life emergencies. And to be clear, they were dealing with these life emergencies, not me. They were, with these terrible hardships. But for me, I wanted to be strong for them. It wasn't about not showing vulnerability, but I wanted to take the work burden off of them so that they could focus on dealing with these very serious issues. Because as a leader, I think that my job is to help people. I'm a service to my team. But if you then project a certain amount of confidence to your team, people assume that you're doing okay, that you don't need help. But as I'd learned as a consultant, if you bottle all of that up, That can have very negative consequences for you, as it did for me when I suffered from depression. And so throughout that time, I built up and used a bunch of support mechanisms. I still work with an executive coach. And throughout that time, to be honest, when all of this stuff was going on, she became more like a counselor to me, to be honest, for me. But she really helped, listening, giving feedback. I'm lucky that I have mentors outside of Atlassian. That's key, outside of the company you work for, whom I could just go and talk to. They would give me support and maybe some feedback. I told my cross-discipline partners in product engineering and marketing what was happening inside my team, without naming names or sharing confidentiality, but I told them what was happening because I wanted them to understand what was going on around, and I wanted for them to trust and support me through that. And of course, my friends and family, whom I shared some of these stories with and whom were there for me always. And so kind of the last piece of real talk is that design leadership can be very lonely, but don't choose to be alone, please. There's a thing about personal mastery as you're growing in your career. You need to learn about and manage yourself in these difficult situations. And to do that, I think you need other people. And so you need to cultivate a peer group, just like you all are here today, right? You're a peer group. Learn from each other, support each other. Because these are the people that you can honestly offload to and who give you useful feedback and who have your back when you need them. I'm lucky I've found my crew, and I've realized also that I need them, that I need these people. And they've saved me in many, many countless moments. And so I'm going to share one more story, but I want to, just for 30 seconds this time, you can trust me again, close your eyes, just for 30 seconds, I promise. Having listened to me for 30 minutes, what do you now think design leadership is? So tell yourself in your head. And then a second question, similar to Stephen's, my one ask. What is one thing that you will do differently in your job when you go back to work tomorrow or the day after or next week? So you can open your eyes now. Thank you again. It's kind of like a mini meditation. As I said, I've got one more short story. I've obviously put this talk together and I had my own reflection on what do I think design leadership is now? Because I used to think it was about my job title. It's not. I used to think it was not about taking on more and more and more things. It's not. I used to think it was all about dealing with it yourself and not having a support group. It's not. And as I crafted this, my lovely daughter, Frankie, this is Frankie, she's 4.5. She'll be 5 next month. She's planning her unicorn party as we speak. But she asked me this, similar to it, she's kind of like an executive coach, really. She that probably cost more. Course of lifetime, you know. But she asked me this really difficult question. This is genuine. She asked me, she said, "Daddy, what do you do at work every day?" I'm like, what do you tell a 4.5, nearly 5-year-old what you do? So I was like, right, what can I tell her? I earn money. Nope. It's not particularly good role modeling there. I go to meetings. Technically true, but probably not very inspirational. I design things. Not technically true anymore, to be honest. And I thought I'd nailed it. I solve problems. Done. So I told Frankie that I solve problems. And then she said, "Daddy, what type of problems do you solve and who with?" Fuck. It's making me think. Damn executive coaches, children. So then I thought about it and I told her, I said, "Frankie, I partner with people and teams to solve design and business problems." And I think that is my own personal realization, is that design leadership is all about people and teams, ultimately. So invest in the people and teams that you work with. They are the ones that build amazing products for your customers. They are at the core, so make them what your job is all about. And so I'm just going to end by sharing with some of the people and teams that I've been fortunate enough to work with today and to have worked with over the last 15 years of my career. And so thank you. I'm here for the rest of the week. I'd love to talk to you all. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Yeah.